When Joyce and I were dating, I noticed something about me that I had not noticed before in any of the other relationships I had with my friend Steve, with my sister, with my parents, with my grandparents, and that is that I did a lot of talking. We did a lot of talking. I can remember being on the telephone for 3 hours, and my ear would get tired. My ear would get sore. And I would think to myself, how do I do this? How is this possible? But that Joyce and I would be on the phone for 3 hours, and in many cases, there were long periods of silence because neither one of us had anything to say, but we didn't want to hang up. We didn't want to end the conversation. Logically, you can imagine that men would have some motivation to talk to a woman when they're dating. I mean, they need to get to know her. Mm-hmm. But few men think that talking for its own sake is a good reason. So what we're going to be talking about a little bit is something that lovers do. They talk to each other intimately. But a lot of couples, when they are not in love anymore, have a lot of trouble doing, have a lot of difficulty getting it done. And that is intimate conversation. Before you're married, the problems are all out there. The problems are about school, the problems are about your parents, the problems are about a friend. They're out there. When you're married, the problems are in here. The biggest problem each of you will have in life will tend to be each other. You see, and the question is, how can you have a great conversation when the conversation is about the faults that you see in each other? How is that going to make your conversation look good? And yet, in marriage, it is inevitable. It is inevitable to have conversation about what's wrong with the other guy. And the question is, how can you do that in a way that makes love bank deposits? We don't want to be making withdrawals. We want to make deposits. So if we want to meet a woman's need for intimate conversation, and it is an extremely important need for a woman, very important. I would say it's probably as important as affection, to be able to talk to her husband intimately. I want you to know what I'm thinking. I want you to know what I'm feeling. I want you to help me with the problems that I have in life. Okay? And you can see how conversation and affection blend with each other. Because if you care about me, you're going to have to talk to me. You're going to have to hear what I have to say. And what she's going to say risks being critical of him. Now, what most men will tell me about complaining, wife complains, is that he wishes she would stop. But a very important part of intimate conversation is for her to communicate what she needs. And if he says to her, I would like you to be more positive. I'd like you to appreciate me more. I would like you to be more thankful. I'd like you to praise God for all the wonderful things he's done for us and not talk so much about things that he hasn't done for us. Has anybody ever felt that way?
Okay.
The basic idea is that a lot of men would like two things from their wife: less complaining and more sex. And I have found that to be almost universal. Almost universal. And my argument has always been to the men, I do not want your wife to complain less. I'd like you to have more sex. but I don't want your wife to complain less. I want your wife to complain whenever she feels there is a problem to complain about.
On the issue of complaining, we've gotten numerous emails over the years where the husband says, my wife was telling me she was concerned about this and that. She was complaining, and I didn't listen. And my wife has left me.
I've often said on our radio show that Joyce and I have a conflict every hour we're together. We have lots and lots of disagreements.
We're totally opposite, yes.
We have different perspectives on life. I use this analogy of Joyce and I being back to back, looking at the world, different horizons. And I'm looking at the mountains and she's looking at the ocean. And the question is, who is seeing the world accurately? The answer is we both are. Now, this has to do with conversation in this way. And that is that I want Joyce to tell me her perspective. And I want her to tell me her problem. I want her to complain. But I want her to do it with respect. I want her to do it with respect. I don't want her to tell me I'm wrong, because my vision is different than hers. And I don't want her to tell me I'm bad. I want her to tell me that she's reacting negatively to something that I'm doing. I talk about the friends and enemies of good conversation. The two content friends are that your conversation should be about each other. That's one content. And you should inquire. Both of you should inquire of the other person. You should be asking each other questions, and you should be answering them honestly. Don't hold anything back. Don't say, well, I know that if I say this to my spouse, he or she'll be disappointed. So I will withhold information. I don't believe in that. I believe in what we call radical honesty. We'll be talking about that in one of our later sessions. The next friend of good conversation is to inform yourself and become educated in each other's favorite topics of conversation. Now, Joyce and I have no trouble at all talking. We talk a lot about all sorts. We've got tons of favorite topics of conversation. Now, one of my favorite topics of conversation is geology. Joyce has no interest, except when I take her out somewhere and there are a bunch of rocks on the ground. She does enjoy picking up the rocks, but she's not interested in the history of a particular land area where you have the strata available because they've done
we're getting into the conversation already. I can hear it, yes.
You know, and to me, it's so fascinating how all of these things happen, you know. But the point is that Joyce and I don't have to talk about everything that I find fascinating. We only have to have these few topics that we both enjoy, and then we got plenty to talk about.
And we have plenty to talk about. We really do, yes.
So those are the two friends of
yes,
good
question,
conversation.
Moses.
I do kind of generally about what we've been talking about. I would say that Tess and I have a unique relationship because we like a lot of the same things.
You've been married for 3 years.
Yeah. That.
You see, this is what happens when people are married is that all too often they are the most compatible the day they're married. The trick is to stay compatible, because as you both grow, your interests will tend to separate. And the question is, are you going to grow together or are you going to grow apart? And my argument has always been that if you don't take an interest in the other person's topics of interest, you're going to grow apart. We'll talk about that more in the next section where we're going to talk about recreational interests. But I think topics of conversation is something that there are forces that will drive you apart if you don't watch for them. Now, in this discussion we've been having, it looks like I do most of the talking, right?
You think?
That isn't really what happens in our marriage. Joyce does a lot of talking, and I do a lot of listening. But that's not balance. Balance is where you both listen and you both talk about the same amount of time. And for couples that I'm counseling, I have to train them to balance their conversation. I say, if one of you is doing all the talking, I want the one of you that does all the talking to stop talking and listen more. And if one of you is doing all the listening, I want you to talk more. I want you to balance it out. I want you both to interact with each other about the same. And then the last friend of good conversation is undivided attention. Joyce does not enjoy talking to me when I am doing something else. Wouldn't you say that?
Yeah, right.
Yeah, we see a lot of this. She wants me to look at her because if I am trying to multitask while we are talking together intimately, she finds that very offensive. So one of the things that we do when we talk to each other is we put everything else out of our minds. I'm not working on another project. I'm not thinking about something I'm going to do tomorrow. I'm basically focusing on Joyce. And eye contact is a big deal. Eye contact means that you have my undivided attention. And when we are talking intimately, we have to schedule time for it. Remember something I said before about sex and affection? I mean, really, if you don't schedule time for that, it isn't going to happen. You're going to be too busy. Too many other things are happening. And if that's true for sex, it's certainly true for conversation.
You know, I'm thinking quality versus quantity. Yeah. And, you know, you guys together, you co-pastors, you're probably talking on the fly a lot about things, right? But I'm thinking we're talking more about sitting down, having that cup of coffee, and talking. We have our best conversations. Now, we don't have eye to eye in the car. Just want to make sure we're not doing this in the car. But because we are not being distracted from anything else. And I think that's the biggest issue.
Now let me tell you a little bit about the enemies of good conversation. These are problems that people have trying to communicate in a way that is ineffective and offensive. And the first of these is demands. If in your conversation you start telling the other guy what to do, that is going to make the conversation go south. The second enemy of good conversation is disrespect. If either one of you comes up with an idea and the other one says, that's really stupid, how could you have ever thought of something like that? That is, again, going to turn the conversation south. You're going to find yourselves not wanting to talk anymore. Or you're going to get angry. You're going to say, you know, that's it. I'm not talking. I'm out of here. Because you basically want respect for each other. I have often said to couples that mutual respect is one of the most important keys to marital success. To the extent that I view Joyce's ideas and her behavior as being something I respect. God has given me her as a privilege. I'm privileged to be in her company. That attitude has helped us enormously well because I have a critical mind. I can be very disrespectful if I let myself go. I can say all sorts of critical things about all kinds of people, including Joyce. And I have not allowed myself to do that. I protect her. I protect her from my critical ideas. Now, that doesn't mean I don't have critical ideas, but it's that I don't say them to her. I am not critical with her. So in my conversation with her, she doesn't hear any disrespect. There are no disrespectful things that come out of my mouth in my conversation. That way, I avoid the second enemy of good conversation. The third one is anger. Anger has no place in marriage. Now, granted, you can feel angry, but don't get angry. Don't lose your temper. Don't have an angry outburst. A lot of times in conversation that couples have with each other, they get angry with each other. It's such an obvious enemy of good conversation. You're going to find yourselves hurting each other in a most egregious way if you allow yourself to express your anger verbally. Now, I encourage people to say, I'm very upset with you. You've done something that really, really bothers me. And I mentioned it before, and you haven't done anything about it, and it's still bothering me, and since you haven't done anything about it, it even bothers me more. I mean, that's, as far as I'm concerned, that is perfectly legitimate. But I don't want you to criticize the other person. I say, well, but isn't that a criticism? No, it's an expression of your negative reaction. It's not saying that the other guy's wrong. It's saying that the other guy has offended you. That is so important to understand the distinction. And then finally, the last enemy of good conversation is dwelling on mistakes. Now, the question is, what do you do if your spouse keeps making the same mistake? I have no problem about bringing up a problem every time it arises. What I have a problem with is the lady that I counseled who, in the middle of the night, shake her husband. Honey, there's something that's really bothering me. Remember 7 years ago when you talked to that girl? I'm thinking about that right now. And I want to talk to you about it. It's still bothering me after 7 years. That is what I want you to avoid. I want to close this session out with just a few tips for conversation. We've talked a lot about the importance of intimate conversation for women. Conversation is also important for men, of course. You need to talk to each other the way you did when you were dating. Can you remember how those conversations went? Can you remember how interested you were in each other? Can you remember how apparently effortless it was? Well, if you're not in love, it's going to take a little bit of work to get back to the way you were before. But once you're in love, once you prime the pump, get the ball rolling, you'll find that you'll be back to the kind of conversation you had early in your relationship. One of the points that I often make is don't be apart overnight. Don't have a job that separates you, because you need conversation. Now, Joyce and I would talk for 3 hours on the phone when we were dating, but usually we were together every day. Usually we were out to see each other. It wasn't, when we were on the phone, it was on a day we couldn't make it. So if you are ever separated overnight, conversation is extremely important. So make sure that you are talking to each other, you have plenty of things to talk about, and that you're on the phone for a long time, making sure that you connect even though you're separated. A woman especially needs to talk to her husband just for the connection itself, just to be able to feel united with him. And if you don't schedule time for intimate conversation, it won't happen.
I mean, I think one thing that I struggle with, and I'm trying to be more aware of it, is being on my phone when I'm in a conversation with Tessa. I mean, nowadays you have phones that have, you do everything. It's your computer, it's your, phones. And so I throughout this conversation we've had, and through conversations I've had with Tessa about it, I know that that's something that probably takes away from that intimate conversation that we should be having.
One of the things that I tell couples to do when they go out together on a date is to turn the cell phone off. There are certain professions where a person's on call.
Yeah.
I don't recommend being on call when you go on a date. You have to treat each other with greater care then you do your job.
Yeah.
You must, or you will lose each other in the process.
What Michael has asked me not to do is come in the house talking on my cell phone. That bothers him. So I'm conscious. It's more so with my mom that I have a harder time saying, I'm home now, Mom. I got to get off the phone. And she'll go, but I say, I'll call you later. Because I'm trying to be more conscious, but
Yes.
am I doing better with that? You would be the one to tell me. I hope so.
Oh, there's a pause.
I've seen you make a concerted effort in doing that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I heard you.
I hear
with
you
it.
say, I gotta go, I'm home now. So I've heard you say that quite a bit.
Good, good, good.
Because there's things that he's been thinking about saying. That's that he wants to say to me, and he's been waiting for me to get home, and then I'm on the phone, and so that bothers him. So I am trying to make an effort. So thank you for saying that, because I want to make sure I'm doing that. Okay.
Great attitude. Great attitude.
One thing that where I see us having the best quality time is early morning when we're probably having hot cocoa, where there's no TV or anything distracting us, and we could have very good conversation in that time where we're just sitting on the couch and there's no TV in there. Because if we're in the bedroom, there's a TV in there, and I'm watching Sports Center. She's trying to talk to me, but I want to watch Sports Center, and I'm trying to pay attention to her, and we don't have really good results.
That does not work.
No.
No, not at all.
There are times where I think we're good at, if there's a bunch of stuff to talk about, Jen will say to me, or I'll say, hey, we got to talk about this stuff tonight. And then we'll sit down after the kids are in bed and know that that's coming. Otherwise, the non-scheduling
So that's kind
of a
of like
time like
scheduling.
that. Yeah, exactly. But there's most of the time that doesn't happen. And then I'm walking around doing other things. And I've learned it's not good to walk away from her when she's like, I can hear you. I'm just in the bedroom. You're in the kitchen.
I stop
I'm listening.
at that point.
Yeah.
Because
and
if
then
you left the
she'll
room,
totally stop.
then I'm done. Because you're not giving me your attention.
And
I don't know what
Yeah.
you're hearing. Are you hearing anything that I'm saying? It's like
Oh,
I
yeah,
get
I can
that at home when I'm with the children. They walk away from me and aren't listening. I don't want that with my husband. I want him to.
See, this is one of the reasons
she'll
that I
call me out on
encourage
that.
couples to get out of the house.
Yeah.
The problem that you have being in the house is that not only does the environment of being in the house create automatic behavior that is not conducive to intimate behavior. In other words, you got all this responsibilities and you have this to do and that to do. The rooms themselves trigger reactions that are not good for intimacy in marriage. So just getting out of that, even if you were to go for a walk, the basic idea is that a walk can create intimacy. Conversation is important for a reason that I haven't mentioned, and that is that it is necessary for almost all other emotional needs. In other words, if you're going to meet any of the other emotional needs, there's going to be conversation involved. So it's kind of a crucial area to make sure that you enjoy talking to each other. Because if you don't enjoy talking to each other, you're going to have a very hard time meeting any of the other emotional needs that you're going to need.